Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. In the long-running conflict between the Jedi and Sith, massacres have been committed by both sides. The Sith were not the only ones who had complete annihilation planned for their adversaries. The Jedi and the Republic were in many ways the first people to come up with this concept. They carried out the raising of Korriban, also known as the Sith Holocaust, around 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. 1,000 years later, the Sith would target the Jedi across the galaxy with assassins. But in all these situations, there were usually survivors who made it away from these extinction events, and so the Sith and Jedi continued returning to the galaxy time and time again. But when Palpatine carried out his grand scheme to kill all of the Jedi, which ended in Order 66, he was far more successful than any of his predecessors. 99% of the Jedi Order perished within minutes of him giving the order to start the executions. How was Palpatine's plan different, and why did so few Jedi actually survive? Unlike the previous attempts to wipe out the other side, Palpatine's scheme was one that was planned over multiple generations. It all started out with the work of Darth Bane, the Sith who created and then implemented the rule of two strategy. What Bane realized was that the Jedi always had two large advantages over the Sith. One, as defenders of the Republic, they had most of the resources and manpower in the galaxy backing them. The Jedi were rarely ever the underdogs when fighting against the Sith. It was actually the other way around. The other major issue was that whenever the Sith made large gains against the Jedi and the Republic, they would ultimately fall into infighting and backstabbing, which would severely weaken the Empire from within. Bane realized the Sith had to change the way they played the game in order to overcome these two weaknesses. Now, Bane was also obsessed with power, and one thing he really didn't like with the current system was large amounts of weaker Sith would team together, create coalitions, and then overcome more powerful individual Sith Lords that in his mind should rightly be in charge. Bane despised the idea of the weak ruling instead of the strong. And so with the rule of two, Bane would try to solve all of his problems. Now there would only be two Sith Lords at a time. The Master would teach the apprentice until the apprentice became strong enough to defeat the Master. And then the new Master would continue seeking new apprentices until that apprentice defeats him or her. One of the terrific side effects of this style of operating was that the Jedi truly believed the Sith to be gone.
Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
I do not believe the Sith could have returned without us knowing.
This allowed the Sith to continue operating, but in the shadows, with minimal exposure. In the past, the Sith had sought to confront the Jedi by destroying the Republic directly. They would build large armies and large fleets to rival the Republic, but they never really had the numbers or resources to hold on to territory. During the Rule of Two era, direct confrontation against the Republic was kind of frowned upon, so the Sith had to create new ways of basically gaining control of the Republic and the galaxy. They ultimately realized that instead of taking on the Republic to destroy the Jedi, what they needed to do was turn the Republic against the Jedi, something that had never been attempted before. Luckily for the Sith, at the time, corruption was increasing in the Republic, and thanks to lax campaign financing laws, you were able to basically influence what happened in the Senate pretty easily if you had a large sum of money. Darth Plagueis and his master Darth Tenebrous were not only Sith Lords, they also were powerful businessmen. They used their wealth not only to gain more wealth, but also to create tension in the Outer Rim that led to political crises like the Naboo blockade and ultimately the Clone Wars itself. In the decades before the war, Darth Plagueis' own Damask holdings lobbied several different groups to make sure that war was going to happen no matter what. They were experts at funneling money into the right places that caused as much damage as possible. It was this unrest that ultimately cost Chancellor Valorum his job and led to the ascension of Chancellor Palpatine, Darth Plagueis' mentor and apprentice. Now, Palpatine and Plagueis would continue to orchestrate unrest throughout the galaxy, which oftentimes even led to the death of Jedi. The Battle of Galadron was a setup from the beginning and led to the death of several Jedi Knights, and more importantly, made the Jedi Master Dooku disillusioned and susceptible to conversion to the dark side. The Jedi Order by this point had undergone 1,000 years of peace. They had grown comfortable and lazy and relatively dogmatic. As a matter of fact, they weren't even teaching their students about the Sith anymore. You weren't really allowed to mention them at all. This left the Jedi Order completely unprepared for what was to come. When the Clone Wars started, it's important to remember that the responsibility of the Grand Army of the Republic was immediately given to Grand Master Yoda of the Jedi Order. This means that the Jedi Order would be involved intimately in the war as commanders and generals. This wasn't actually always the case with the Jedi, and several times in the history of the Republic, the Jedi had sat out wars and determined that it was not their responsibility to get involved. The decision to join and fight in the Clone Wars was made without much debate or thought. The Jedi Order didn't have much time, there was a massive threat to the Republic, and shortly after they found out that the leader of the enemy faction was a former Jedi who is now a Sith Lord, Count Dooku. The Separatist Alliance also had a massive military force, and the corporate entities in the Outer Rim seem to have been preparing for this conflict for some time. This huge shock made the Jedi rush headlong into conflict. They weren't able to sit down and debate it and talk it over. Now, the Jedi had a very interesting relationship with the clones. In many ways, they were similar. Both groups were raised away from their real parents and forced into servitude at a very young age and trained their entire life to protect the Republic. This means that some Jedi developed very close bonds with their clone troopers. Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex would still be friends decades after they both survived Order 66. But this was a rarity. Most Jedi were trained not to get too close or attached to anyone. The closest relationship that most Jedi had was with their masters or apprentices. To be an effective military leader, the Jedi would have to see the clones under their command as military assets and not as individuals. It's not to say that the Jedi were cruel to the clones beneath their command. Most were not and would go out of their way to save a clone's life, but there was a clear and professional barrier in between the Jedi and their clone officers and troopers. The clone trooper was bred and trained to be the perfect soldier. You never really had to worry about discipline issues or soldiers not doing their duty or disobeying an order. Clone troopers were all quite competent in any task you asked them to do, and as a unit they had very good morale and rarely broke, even when in dire circumstances. The clones also didn't have any distractions outside of the GAR. Their entire family was actually in the unit they served with, so they would fight to the deaths for one another. It was a perfect system that created the perfect soldier, and perhaps that's what put the Jedi at ease. You didn't really need to be a good commander to lead a group of clone troopers. They basically did their job all by themselves. And so what that led to was a commanding Jedi class that paid very little attention to what the clones were thinking. The Jedi were far too busy dealing with the war to notice their clones as anything more than units on a holomap. Even if Fives had been able to inform the Jedi Order about the control chips inside all of their heads, even if the Jedi technicians were somehow able to uncover knowledge about Order 66, it would have been pretty hard to identify the culprit or blame any of this on Palpatine. If anything, Order 66 was just one of 150 different orders designed to stabilize the Republic. You see, Order 66 was not an assassination order, it just identified the Jedi as traitors and instead orders their execution. This was actually not a radical idea, as the threat of the Jedi turning to the dark side was a very real threat. It's probably something the Jedi would have even went along with themselves had they been informed about it. To make things even look less suspicious, there were 3 separate orders that could remove the Supreme Chancellor as well in case he crosses the line. When Order 66 was launched, Chancellor Palpatine had also isolated most of the talented Jedi Knights and Masters in the Outer Rim during the Outer Rim Siege. This was basically the Confederacy of Independent Systems' last stand against the Republic. The Jedi were desperate to finally end the war and had committed their entire order to the war effort. This also means that the best Jedi in the Order were all spread out across the galaxy. Many of them were now operating alone at this stage because their apprentices had either failed and died in conflict or had succeeded and become Jedi Knights themselves, and maybe even taken on apprentices themselves. And so when Order 66 was carried out, most of the Jedi who were alone perished, especially if they were patrolling alongside the clone troopers when the call came in. Aayla Secura didn't even have time to turn around before she was gunned down. Our ace pilot Plo Koon in his interceptor didn't stand a chance against his wingmate's ARC 170 medium laser cannons. Ki-Adi-Mundi was caught with the clone marines behind his back and the Separatist droid army in front of him. He didn't stand a chance either, but at least he got his lightsaber up to deflect a few bolts back. If anyone could kill a Jedi efficiently, it was the clones. They had watched their commanders in combat for years now and understood their strengths and weaknesses. And so when Order 66 was called, the clones knew how to exploit the Jedi's defenses by surrounding them and outnumbering them. The Jedi weren't invincible. They weren't able to slow down time. They could only block a certain amount of bolts, and if multiple troopers coordinated their shots at close range, a Jedi's defenses would crumble relatively quickly. Ki-Adi-Mundi had actually been a master at Form 3, or Sarusu, a defensive form that was useful against blasters, but even at that range, he was helpless against the clones' barrage. In order to survive the initial assassination attempt, a Jedi had to move quickly, like Ahsoka Tano, and quickly disengage from the enemy, or be lucky enough that they are farther away when the clones attempt their assassination, like Obi-Wan Kenobi when he had his mount shot out from underneath him. Now, when the Jedi wasn't outnumbered during Order 66, or maybe had their Padawan along with them, survival was much more likely. Caleb Dune was saved by his master Deepa Billaba, and Cal Kestis had the hulking Jaro Tapal to defend him. But even if a Jedi was able to escape that initial attempt on their life, they usually were still trapped in the middle of a fleet or a military force. The same layers of defenses that used to protect the Jedi General now became their prison. Escape could never really be achieved alone. On Kashyyyk, Yoda luckily had befriended the Wookiees, and they sided with the Jedi after the clones executed Order 66. Without the Wookiees, Yoda probably would have struggled greatly to get off the planet and would have remained trapped there. Ahsoka Tano was trapped on a ship after Order 66 and managed to remove Captain Rex's control chip, and also freed Maul in order to create a diversion to give them time to escape. But even she was only able to escape because of pure luck and skill, and she had to destroy an entire Venator-class Star Destroyer as well. Generally, when a Jedi was trapped on a large ship surrounded by clones during Order 66, they didn't survive, or at least they would take down the ship with them. That's exactly what Jaro Tapal did when the clones turned against him. The rest of the Jedi that were left were all neatly packed away in the Jedi Temple. Because most Jedi were engaged in the front, aside from the Temple Guardians, most of the Jedi inside of the Temple were not skilled combatants. What happened in the Temple can only be described as a massacre because it was so one-sided. Darth Vader would lead a legion of clones and basically kill every individual they could find, ending the Jedi threat once and for all and turning their sacred temple into a new throne for the Sith. Now, you don't have to like Palpatine in order to respect Order 66. Just like how most people hate Bill Belichick, but at the same time can't help but admire the amazing things he's accomplished. So don't hate the player, hate the game, if you have to. Palpatine and the Sith before him put a lot of effort into killing and destroying the Jedi, and it really shows at the end of the day. He created the perfect war to draw out the Jedi and then surrounded them with the perfect assassins. So there you have it, guys. Those are the reasons why Order 66 was so successful and why so few Jedi survived. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. Also, check us out on Facebook if you have some time. Anyway, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.